This week on Pop of Culture, we pick up the banjo.
The footprint of the instrument is pretty big, a lot bigger than most people who have just been influenced by, reruns of the Beverly Hillbillies and Hee Haw would think.
We talked to Grammy-winning musician Alison Brown.
Also this hour, we learn about the art of bookbinding.
And we enjoy a beautiful thing. More on that coming up.
Pop of Culture on IPR is made possible in part by Psi Iota Xi. Additional support comes from the Indiana Arts Commission, the Community Foundation of Randolph County, the National Endowment for the Arts, and sustaining members of IPR. You can support local programming today at indianapublicradio.org.
From IPR, this is Pop of Culture. I'm Jen Blackmer.
And I'm Kara Duquette. Later this hour, we speak to Grammy award-winning musician Alison Brown.
She'll tell us about making music with Steve Martin, one of my heroes, and how bluegrass is bringing new audiences in.
First, let's learn about the spellbinding work of bookbinding.
I see what you did there.
Today, we are speaking with Rai Peterson. Rai is a Ball State alumna, a retired literature professor, Indiana artisan, paper artist, bookbinder, and owner of her artisan business, High Class Booker. Thank you so much for being here today, Rai.
Thanks for asking me, Kara.
Of course. I want to start out by asking what inspired you to get into hand-making, hand-binding books?
Yeah, so I love paper. I love all kinds of paper, but I particularly love hand-marbled papers from around the world. And, a piece of hand-marbled paper costs around in the neighborhood of $35. So what can you do with it if you have a piece of beautiful paper? You could wrap a gift in it, and you could cringe when the recipient just tore it open violently, right? Or you could make something out of it that you could carry with you. And I like hand marbled paper so much that I think of it as a kind of a comfort. And so I like having it with me. And so I put it on books, and then I can carry it to meetings, etc.
Wow. When you talk about hand marbled paper, I have many different papers in my head. I have made paper out of dryer lint, actually, in the past. But for you, are you talking about a specific type of marbling or a specific process?
Making paper and marbling paper, right, are totally separate. I've made paper too, but not very successfully because it tends to be lumpy and gray and curly and that kind of thing. Hand marbling, I've also done, but I really, in my business, I leave that to the experts. Quickly, and you can see this on YouTube all the time. You take paper, you treat it with alum to make it receptive to ink, and then you float ink or thinned paint on thickened water, and you draw in it with tools that look like combs, and then you float the paper on it and transfer that ink onto the paper.
Beautiful. That sounds very similar to, marbling scarves and other fabrics.
Is, actually.
Okay. I want to know, beyond the papers inspiring you, which is amazing, what else has inspired you to make books?
Well, I think really just I like books a lot. I mean, I'm a former literature professor, and also in my career, my publisher Parrish line of work was in biography, and so I know the paper that lasts is of enormous interest to people, and not necessarily the paper that you think. I mean, private letters are great, handwritten diaries are great. But I would jump for joy when I found someone's check register, right? Because the most mundane pieces of paper, recipes, family notes, that sort of thing, a check register, it tells where people got their money and how they spent their money. And that's the story of their life right there.
Yeah.
Well, add to it who they loved and who they slept with, and there you've got it all, right? So, so I think that I want paper to last. And so the books I build are all 100% archival, which means acid-free materials that are capable of lasting at least 400 years. And, sometimes people say, well, what am I going to write that's going to be of interest in 400 years? And I think, do we not live in the most interesting time in our lifetime right now? We're just briefly post-COVID, and we're living in a politically tumultuous time. And in the past week, an airplane has fallen out of the sky every day. Like, if that's not going to be interesting to people in the future, I really don't. They're going to have some incredible entertainment.
Oh, for sure. It's like you just even when you write anything and then you look at it when you're not in it, in a year or 10 years or a whole nother generation, it just has a different appeal, than possibly when you're in it.
Exactly. Here's a bit of heresy. I don't keep a daily journal. I'm not really that interested in what I ate for breakfast. But when I travel, I always keep a daily journal. And no matter how late I get in or how exhausted I am, I find time to write 3 or 4 pages every day when I'm away from home. And I think that my goal for that is that when I'm in a nursing home, someone in my family will have to read those to me and convince me I had an interesting life.
Well, that is something to look forward to. Can I ask you, what are you working on right now, Ray?
Well, right now I'm in just a really high production mode. I do commissions. I build books, that people ask me to build for them. And then I also, as an Indiana artisan, I sell work through the store, and I participate in the Indiana Artisan Marketplace, which is coming up the last week of March on the weekend on Saturday and Sunday at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. And so right now I'm building inventory for that. And so it's kind of fun. I have, in my shop, I have a lot of flat files, and they're full of beautiful papers and the medallions, the talismans that I put in the covers of books. And I get to kind of browse around and shop and put together combinations I like and then build those books.
Okay. So you talk about the talisman. Where does that come from? When did you start doing that?
Well, I started. When I worked, I had this marvelous job. Because I studied women who lived in Paris between the wars. I got to go to Paris a lot, and while I was in Paris, here's the thing. I think in the 19th century, the French probably gave a bronze medal to everybody for everything. And so in flea markets and coin shops, et cetera, around Paris, you can find these incredibly sculpted bas-relief little medallions, maybe 2-3 inches across. And I really loved them. I started collecting them, and I knew about treasure bindings, which are, when people were illiterate, binders sometimes put gemstones and gold and valuable things on the covers of books to communicate that books were things of value. And so I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to bring back treasure binding in a way that's compatible with modern bookshelves, because when you build a book now, it has to be able to be forced into an overstuffed bookshelf because, in the current time, people can own more books than are really good for them. So I started putting those medals and medallions I found in France in the covers of books as good luck charms. And I kind of thought at first that was my little peccadillo and nobody would be interested in it. But when I started doing markets and shows, I found demand for more and more valuable medals being put in the covers of books.
Wow. I did not know about that history in books. Well, there is so much that we could talk about in terms of bookbinding. I know that you utilize many different stitches and edgings. Is that correct?
There are a lot of stitches. There are as many ways to sew a book as there are to people who sew them.
Nice.
But I really I prefer a stitch called the link stitch. And the reason I like it is because it's called a flat stitch, and it allows the book to lay open without fighting it at any page. So, when you get a book from the library and you're reading it and your thumb gets tired because you're just fighting the spine to hold the book open.
Yes.
Um, I build books that people write in and draw in, and they don't want to fight the spine in order to do that. So I build books that lay open easily at any page.
Yeah, that's I love that. You don't have to put that energy into holding the book open. You can just enjoy.
Right. But that means that like those books, the reason library books are hard to hold open is because it's expedient, right? I mean, machines sew those books. And they can sew them out of flat sheets of paper, which is also a great benefit for people building books in a factory. But every one of my books is absolutely hand sewn using a needle and thread. And my mother, rest her soul, would just croak if she could see me sewing because she tried so hard to teach me to sew fabric. And I would always poke myself and leave a bunch of DNA on it to get out and get to go play again. So it's kind of amazing that I sew pristine white paper and I don't poke my fingers and make a mess on it.
Well, she must love that, Well, Rai, I really appreciate you spending some time with us and talking about what you're up to. And you said that we can find you at the Artisan Market at the Indiana State Fair. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Rai Peterson is a bookbinder and retired professor.
We're going to do something a little different now. River Teeth is a biannual journal of nonfiction narrative. That means essays from personal experience, like memoirs, but very short. River Teeth Journal has a weekly online magazine called Beautiful Things, full of what the journal calls micro-essays. And we're going to share one with you now. Desiree Cooper is an author and journalist in the Virginia Beach area, and she is sharing with us a beautiful thing today. Her beautiful thing is called Waste Not. And Desiree, thank you so much for joining us here.
I'm so excited to be here, Jen. Thank you.
And can you tell us a little bit, before we hear the piece, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this?
Yes. So I spent my whole adult life living in the Midwest in Detroit. And my parents were in Virginia, and they started aging. And so I picked up my life and moved from the Midwest to the Virginia Beach area in with them. Once again, a child I was 56 at the time, in with my parents to take care of them, both of them who had Alzheimer's at the same time. And so this piece comes out of my first few years caregiving for my parents.
All right. Well, let's hear it.
Waste not. My parents are old and inert. Their bones want only to be still. There's not much we can do for entertainment except sit here, and then for a change of scenery, sit there. When the weather is nice, and sometimes even when the rain is warm and gentle, I lift up the garage door and arrange the cushioned lawn chairs so that they can sit just inside the lip and watch the neighbors come and go. Sometimes we sip Cokes and sometimes we snack. Sometimes we have music, a little Motown or Boots Randolph to help us mark the time. But mostly we sit for hours and say nothing, or else listen to the rolling tide of my father's repetitious questions. I remember all those years when time was my enemy, invisible and cruel, like gravity. It would barrel forward so furiously, I had no idea where it went. As soon as I'd awaken, it would already feel blown. It passed in a gust of overwhelm. It had breath, but no weight. It had seasons, but no flavor. My parents and I are closer to the end of our lives than to the beginning. If anyone, we should know better than to throw away the uncertain measure. We should be scurrying and feathering, scrimping and stretching. But we aren't. Time now stretches languid in the humid afternoon, shimmering just above the hot asphalt. It tastes like caramel cake. It smells like pine needles in the rain. It looks like every second a different thing as the light goes a little higher, then lower, white, then yellow, then crimson, then indigo. We have learned something. Our days cannot be hoarded, only spent. And in these last luxurious hours, we are rich. We spend as much time as we want.
Oh, Desiree. That is incredible. That is really incredible. What a tribute, and what a moment, and the way you capture the moment and talk about time and the fluidity of time, and how you contrast it with time when you were younger and time now. Wow.
Yeah,
Kind of takes my breath away. Yeah, it is a very different thing. And a couple of things that really resonated with me is this idea of time having breath but no weight, and seasons but no flavor early. And then as you spend it now with your parents, it's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so strange to me. I'm a type A personality, and very goal-oriented kind of person. And so there's always a list, there's always the next thing, there's always planning for the next thing. I raised 2 children, and I was working outside of the home that entire time. So all that juggling was happening, and there was just not a moment. I mean, if you're doing nothing, then you're lazy, or you're not getting somewhere.
Yeah,
Or you
yeah.
know,
And that's what our culture tells us,
right,
yeah.
right. Or please don't take a nap, or sleep in.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I just kind of got pulled out. I mean, by the time I moved in with my parents to care for them, I had launched my children and actually had 1 grandchild. I have 3 now, but I had 1 at the time. So I was kind of done with a lot of that, but where I was then, Jen, was okay, let's make up for lost time. This is
Yeah.
Des's time. Here we go. And I'm on a whole nother roller coaster.
Yeah, and it's that type A coming back saying that,
Yeah.
now I have to do this the right way. Yeah.
Exactly. And then it just all stops. I move from the Midwest to the South, where time is a little different anyway.
Sure.
And I move in with older people, where time is a little different anyway. And I'm in an environment where I didn't grow up. I don't have the connection. So they are my island, We're
Of course.
and then this was I moved in 2016, but, soon thereafter, we're into pandemic. And so I got the best lesson about being Zen that I could ever have gotten. I'm sort of trapped in a world where only the present exists. I mean, my parents had Alzheimer's.
Right.
They remember the far past, but not the recent past. And in the next moment, they might have forgotten what happened in the moment before. And so it was very strange. And I'm going to tell you, once I stopped fighting it, which did take time, there was just nothing like just sitting outside, just sitting outside. That's it.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. And it just taught me so much. And I'm glad about a lot of things from that phase of my life, which is now over. Both of my parents are deceased now, and I'm still here in Virginia. But I'm glad I got to taste time. Have you ever eaten a meal and you just didn't even taste it because it was so delicious, or you were so starving and it's gone before you really enjoyed it?
And eating is like the next thing on the calendar that you have to do, right?
Yeah.
And so then you're just moving on and on and on.
Exactly. Well, I got to taste it. I got to taste time. And I have to tell you, I'm slipping back and forth between old Des and new Des.
Yeah, yeah. Again, because the world tells you otherwise, right? The world presses you to continue on that pace. Yeah, there's something very resonant about what you've written. And obviously, Alzheimer's and dementia is such a pervasive experience that so many of us have. And I experienced something very similar with my mother. And I remember just being with her, and one of her favorite things to do, one of the things that would calm her down, was riding in the car. And it wasn't like going somewhere, right? It was just the experience of being in the vehicle and the hum and the movement of the landscape, because she lived in the country. So I would go and visit her and we would take rides. And one of the things that I'll never forget about that time was how she experienced things differently, right? And the details that I would normally miss, like reflections of light on the wall, for example, became just endless sources of fascination. And there's something about losing memory and losing time that is just so horrible, especially for someone you love so deeply. And I think we focus so much on the loss that sometimes we forget to think about the gifts too.
I agree. And I resonate with that as well. Both of my parents did like to drive, but just as you were talking, it just occurred to me that we forget about wonder.
Yeah. And discovery. And
yeah. And so that is something that dementia and Alzheimer's patients often have, is wonder, because it's brand new again.
Yeah.
And for those of us who aren't in that world, it can be frustrating. Maybe you don't remember this, or you keep saying the same thing over and over again. But it also is a chance to always be new to something, to that moment, or always see something like you just expressed, the shadow, the light. My parents used to look out of the window when we were driving and look at the trees and like, how did all those trees get even? Like, there's nobody there to cut them. Like, you're in the woods and they're all the same height, And they would say that every single time we got in the car.
Because it was new. Oh,
but
wow.
I driven past that and I never had that wonder. Yeah, that is actually a good question. Like, they are the same height. How did that happen? So it is wonder that we lose track of when we accelerate time, or when we're just consuming time but not experiencing it. And so I wanted to get that on the page. So that was my goal.
Well, and I think you met that goal and then some. And one of the reasons I love what you've shared is, in addition to the words and the essay, we also get to hear your voice sharing that with us, which is such a I will say it, beautiful thing about being able to share this kind of work on the radio, right? Is that it can be experienced in any way. And there's the aspect of time. When somebody reads an essay, they are also experiencing it in time, and we are experiencing it at the same time you are, as you share it with us. And just hearing your lovely voice recall these memories as you share the words was really profound for me.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have to do a shout out to not only beautiful things, but the idea of flash as a form of art, a writing form of art. And it is between a poem and a story.
Right.
And so much can happen in such a short period of time. And one thing I love about the form is that I always call it sort of like an instant book club. Like, you can read through something as a group, and then talk about it as a group in one moment, talk about time.
Yeah.
So it's a lovely form if people haven't discovered it yet, or Beautiful Things is a good place to go and be introduced to it. It's my favorite.
So, Desiree Cooper, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing your work, Waste Not.
Thank you so much for having me.
Desiree Cooper is an author and journalist. She lives in the Virginia Beach area. This story comes from IPR's collaboration with River Teeth's Beautiful Things, a weekly magazine of micro essays. More at riverteethjournal.com. This is Pop of Culture. I'm Jen Blackmer.
And I'm Cara Duquette. Alison Brown is a Grammy-winning musician and producer known for her progressive banjo playing style. She started as an investment banker with degrees from Harvard and UCLA, and she's made her way all the way to Pruis Hall this Saturday, March 8th. And she talked to our co-host, Michelle Kinsey.
Joining me is Alison Brown, and she will be performing with her banjo this weekend at Pruis Hall on the campus of Ball State University. Alison, thank you so much for joining us.
Michelle, thank you so much for having me.
So who are you bringing to the Muncie show? Who will you have with you?
Well, it'll be the longstanding members of my quintet. So we've got Jody Nardone playing piano and John Ragusa on flute, Gary West on bass, and then Brian Brock on drums.
Great. What was it initially about the banjo that drew you in, Alison, and how has your relationship with the instrument changed over the years?
Oh my gosh. Well, when I was a kid, I heard Earl Scruggs' Foggy Mountain Banjo record, and that I just loved the sound of the instrument, and there was really no reason why I should have, except that it's a great sound. But I was taking fingerstyle guitar lessons, and it was kind of during the great folk scare of the late 60s, early 70s. And when I heard Earl's banjo, I just really wanted to learn how to make that sound. And so it's funny because I really feel like the banjo chose me. Not really sure why it did, but I'm incredibly glad that it did, because it's just really shaped my whole personal journey, both, my career but also an inward journey too, like the journey of self-discovery that I guess we're all engaged on.
Sure. And so what has, this journey that you've been on with the banjo, what has it brought you? What has it done for you all of these years, Alison?
Oh boy, that would be an entire podcast series because it's done so much for me.
Yeah.
I grew up in Southern California, in La Jolla, and started playing banjo there. So as a teenager, I was playing in different clubs and festivals and things mostly around the Los Angeles area. And then, reading in my pages of Bluegrass Unlimited magazine about the, Southern Appalachia and the states where the music came from. So when I finally had a chance, like after college, after business school, after a stint as an investment banker, to join Alison Krauss and Union Station's band and then travel around the parts of the country where the music came from, it just really connected me to a part of America that I had never really, been a part of, like physically been a part of, even though I had been, in a sense, through playing this instrument, that the style originated in Southern Appalachia. So the instruments really just connected me to such a demographically diverse group of people that have made my life, infinitely richer.
Yeah. What I love is that you're always pushing the boundaries of what the instrument can do. Why was that, or why is that so important to you to continue to do that?
Well, that's something that's come really naturally for me. I love Earl Scruggs' playing. But the hardest thing for me to do is to write a kind of a Scruggs style banjo tune. And it's been it's much more natural for me to take the banjo in other directions. And I think it's kind of like that idea of you are what you eat. I think musicians, we are what we listen to. And I've been influenced by a lot of music, growing up in California in the 70s. My influences were obviously a lot different than Earl Scruggs growing up in Shelby, North Carolina in the 1920s. So I think that's just trying to kind of find my muse in the instrument. I think that's why I've kind of explored different musical directions with the banjo. But it's natural for the instrument too, I think, because, the banjo is there at the birth of jazz. Banjo has a tradition in, Caribbean calypso music.
Yeah.
So the banjo has been in a lot of places, like the repertoire that people played on the banjo at the end of the 1800s. It was called classic banjo, and they were kind of adapting classical melodies to the banjo. So the footprint of the instrument is pretty big, a lot bigger than most people who have just been influenced by, reruns of the Beverly Hillbillies and
Yes.
Hee Haw would think.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so great about what you do is that you're really kind of taking the banjo to everyone, and letting everyone experience something different with the instrument. And I think you did a really great job of that on your most recent album on banjo. And in particular, I really, really loved Foggy Morning Breaking.
Oh, yeah.
And you worked with somebody pretty amazing who I believe, let me see, referred to you as the great lyrical genius of modern banjo. Come on, that's amazing. What a compliment from Steve Martin, right?
Right? Like, who'd have thought? That's like such high praise for somebody who's just one of the most creative minds on the planet. And someone who's a great banjo player in addition to all his many other talents. And when I was working on that record, one of the challenges I set for myself was to write music with different, people in mind. Hopefully they would collaborate and record with me. And the tune that Steve and I wrote together is called Foggy Morning Breaking, and it's in double C tuning, which is not a traditional tuning for bluegrass style players, but it is for clawhammer players. And Steve is a great clawhammer player, so I thought he'd, like something in that tuning. And I sent him that A section and he sent me like the most perfect B section back, like almost immediately.
Wow.
And I don't know why should have been surprised, because I know Steve is a great writer, but he's also just has such amazing musical instincts and is such a great writer of music. And when that song went to #1 on Bluegrass Radio, after the record came out, I was really surprised, and Steve was completely over the moon. And he was so excited that he wrote words to a song about having a #1 song on Bluegrass Radio, which we then, wrote and finished up together and recorded, and we put out. It's called Bluegrass Radio. It went to #1 on Bluegrass Radio. So then we started writing more and more music, and we're just about done with an album's worth of music together. So it's just one more of the magical things of the banjo for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so can you tell us when to look for that album?
Yes, we're shooting for the fall, and we do have a new single coming out at the end of March with the amazing Tim O'Brien doing lead vocals.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I'm hoping, I'm guessing that there might be a tour with that album. Maybe.
Well, you never know. You never know. It would be such a treat to get to play the music live. But for now, just getting to collaborate on that level with Steve Martin has been just an incredible privilege, as you might imagine.
If it does happen, you'll definitely have to come back to Muncie for sure. For sure.
Okay, that's a deal.
When you are performing, Alison, who are you seeing in the audience, and how has your audience kind of changed over the years?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I remember when I was a little girl and just starting to play banjo contests, which were my first exposure to playing in front of an audience. My grandmother used to say to me, Alison, just pretend they're heads of cabbage. Which is such a funny thing, because I don't look at it that way at all. I mean, I just see a really, kind of, demographically diverse audience, and, people who are interested in kind of expanding their kind of listening parameters. I mean, you would kind of have to be like curious, musically curious, to hear what a banjo can do besides, make music that sounds like bank robbery or high-speed car chase music.
Yes.
And, there are always banjo players in the audience, which is fantastic. But the most gratifying thing to me is when, like, the partner of a banjo player who was dragged to the show because their significant other is a banjo player comes up after the show and says, I've never really liked the banjo that much before, but I really get it now, and I really like it. And part of our mission is to really shine a light on the lyrical and accessible side of the instrument. So that's always makes me really happy to hear.
Oh, I love that. And I am sure you're going to see a lot of those people in the audience this weekend at Ball State. Thank you so much for your time, Alison. This has just been a joy.
Well, it's been a joy for me too, Michelle. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Foggy Morning Breaking with Alison Brown and Steve Martin. was Foggy Morning Breaking with Alison Brown and Steve Martin.
Alison Brown is an internationally recognized banjo player, composer, and producer. She spoke to our co-host, Michelle Kinsey.
I'm Kara Duquette.
And I'm Jen Blackmer. It's time to ask another artist, what are you working on?
Today we are talking with Dennis and Sherry Whitted. Dennis is a woodturner and has a good eye for all kinds of beautiful wood. He has over 300 different kinds of wood that he turns. And Sherry makes all sorts of art. She knits, she works in diamond dots, and is very supportive of Dennis and his wood turning. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start by asking, can you tell us exactly what being a woodturner is about? Or how you do it?
Hard question. What's it about?
Well, what do you use?
Well, what I do is I take a chunk of wood, put it on a tool called a lathe, and I just start turning. And what it does, I don't know what the piece of will turn out to be. Like I know it's going to be like, for example, a bowl or a rolling pin or a tool. But I just started turning, and the wood actually tells me what to make.
Oh, that's interesting. So you take the wood and you go into it knowing it will be something.
Right.
And the wood informs.
Yes, it tell me because of grain or the shape or defects in the wood. Sometimes if there's a defect, I'll have to go in and do a different type of turning. And then also I take sometimes like on bowls, I laminate bowls. So I take 2 or 3 different types of wood and glue them together, and then I'll turn a bowl out of it.
So I know what throwing pottery on a wheel would look like. Can you describe a little bit of how you put the wood in a lathe and what that looks like?
All right. The lathe I have, I can turn up to 3 foot in diameter. And what it is, it's got a thing called a faceplate that you mount the wood onto, and then mount the faceplate onto the lathe, and then it's got an item called a tailstock comes up and holds the wood steady. And then I've got an item called a tool rest that's part of the lathe, and you just set your tool on that, and it'll spin, and you start in just working, taking the wood off of the chunk of wood.
Okay. And are there different types of turning tools?
Yes, there's dozens of different types. They've got the round head, got the square, and then it's got a chisel pointed type. And then each one's got its own function.
Okay. Well, now, so how do you select the wood that you want to use? Do you have so much wood?
A lot of times when I have an order in, I'll ask them, say, what type of wood do you like? A lot of people don't know all the different types of wood I have. So I'll ask them if they want a light wood or dark wood, so they choose the type of wood, and then I just go in. If they know what type of wood they want, they'll just tell me. And like I said, I've got over 300 different types of wood in stock. So I could just go in my shop and pull out that type of wood and just start turning it.
Nice.
And some of it he uses is he'll take boards, planks, what do you call them? Dimensional lumber, and he'll cut that up and then stack it as he was talking about.
Glue it, and then I glue it, it stacks up, and then I can turn it. So I can have a dozen different types of wood in one bowl.
Is that what you were talking about, the lamination?
Right. And then there is also, he'll take a chunk from somebody has just cut some wood. A tree came down or something. When Winchester had their tornado, there was a lot of wood around because lots of trees came down. So he would get some of that and just start turning it just to see what it would look like. And I'm kind of glad I'm married to him, because if I weren't, I'd buy everything he has and I wouldn't have any money.
Well, Sherry, can you describe one of your favorite pieces that Dennis has made?
So many, but I absolutely love box elder, flamed box elder. It is a it's a deciduous tree, which means the leaves come off. And the wood has been stained by box elder bugs. Box elder bugs get into it and stain it.
It's got like a virus, and then they stain it, and it's got like red streaks through the wood.
Yes, and he's made several, but he made a salad bowl that was just brilliant. He doesn't paint anything, he doesn't stain anything. Everything is the natural wood.
Now, I remember seeing a beautiful bowl that held yarn.
Yes.
And you could feed it
Yeah,
through.
it's called a yarn bowl. That's one of my better selling items at Fiber Fest. And most of those I make are laminated, so I can make them taller. It's easier to cut because of the shape of them.
And it's because it's taller, you can put yarn into it. And the bottom of it, he keeps quite a bit of wood so it doesn't move all over the place.
So it'd be bottom heavy instead of top heavy. So when they pull on the yarn, it doesn't tip over.
It stays in place. Well, can you tell us about Fiber Fest? You mentioned that. Can we see you there?
Yes, Fiber Fest is at Jay County
Community building.
And it is, the date is March the 7th and 8th.
And they have all kinds of vendors, primarily for yarn goods or sewing things. And they come in and shear sheep, and then the people will take that yarn or that wool and go ahead and spin it right in front of you. And it's pretty awesome. They have weavings, they have
a lot of different classes they offer there.
Well, can you give us your web address so people can find you?
The web address, it's on Facebook, and it's Whitted Handcrafted Bowls.
It's on the back.
And you can go onto Facebook and see it. Most of the things that he has made at one point or another are on there.
Is there something else you want to tell us about being a wood turner?
It's a lot of fun. It gets stressed out. I've already retired twice, and I'm a workaholic, so I have to do something. So I go out there every day and start turning something. Mm-hmm. What's nice about having my shop at my house, if I get tired of turning, I'll just go in and take a nap, and then go back out and get back to work.
Well, that's beautiful.
And we live in Winchester. If you want to come and see how he does this work, they used to do it in schools. That's how he learned how to do it. But they don't do that in most schools anymore. It's not in their wheelhouse. So he can show you how to do it. He can do it. You can pick out your own wood. And it's just absolutely beautiful wood.
Well, thank you so much for both of you for taking your time to talk with us today.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Guess what, Kara?
What?
It's time for the arts calendar. Yay!
Excellent.
Why don't you kick us off?
I sure will. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. The 6 wives of Henry VIII take the microphone to reclaim their identities from their infamous spouse in 6. This Broadway musical in the style of a pop concert won the Tony Award for Best Original Score, and you can see it at Clues Memorial Hall through March 9th. More info at butlerartscenter.org.
It's a great show. Nice. 6 is an awesome show. Okay, only a fool would say that they wouldn't join you for Brooklyn Charmers, a Steely Dan tribute band. These showbiz kids hail from Chicago rather than New York, but they're dedicated to bringing precision and a new energy to Steely Dan's well-known blend of rock and jazz. Their goal is to delight lifelong fans and bring new fans into the Allied Solutions Center for the Performing Arts in Carmel on March 7th. Showtime is 8 p.m. Any major dude would tell you that you can find more at thecenterpresents.org.
I've missed you, Jen. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Saturday, March 8th, the actual 3 Dog Night takes the stage at the Honeywell Center's Ford Theater. The band has been on the airwaves and on the road for over 50 years. They hold a record for 21 consecutive top 40 hits and still tour over 70 dates a year. More info at honeywellarts.org.
That's incredible. Thinking about my dad's Three Dog Night albums. All right. We talked about journaling in today's show. If you've been looking for a push to start preserving more memories, the E.B. and Bertha C. Ball Center presents Writing Your Life, collect a series of vignettes for posterity. Whether you have writer's block on your memoir or no idea where to start writing, award-winning writer Lilan Musselman will guide you through prose or poetry, your choice. This is a 3-class session, but you can get caught up after registering at bsu.edu.
Next Friday at noon, you should be listening to Pop of Culture on IPR.
That's right.
But if you need a quiet moment away, step into the David Owsley Museum of Art on Ball State's campus for Mindfulness in the Museum. Professor Emeritus Dr. George Wolfe will lead a guided meditation. After the meditation, stick around for Hollywood Portraits with Ron Brown. Ron is a local photographer and guest curator at the museum who will take your portrait in the style of film and television stars. The snapshots click from 2 to 4 p.m. next Friday and Saturday, March 14th and March 15th. Both events are open to the public with no registration required, but you can find more at bsu.edu/artmuseum.
Also next weekend is St. Patrick's Day weekend. There are, of course, events across East Central Indiana, including downtown Muncie. Friday, March 14th, starting at 5 p.m., gather for an Irish-themed menu, tasty holiday-themed beverages, including the non-alcoholic options, and live music from the Hunter Lee Band. They'll play an almost acoustic set at the Second Story Lounge in downtown Muncie. If you have an event worth gathering for, tell us. Go to indianapublicradio.org/contact and select Pop of Culture.
Pop of Culture on IPR is made possible in part by Psi Iota Xi. Additional support comes from the Indiana Arts Commission, the Community Foundation of Randolph County, the National Endowment for the Arts, and sustaining members of IPR. You can support local programming today at indianapublicradio.org.
And that's our show. Our executive producer is Angie Rapp. Our regular producer is Luke Jones, who I've been bugging to take banjo lessons.
Totally should.
Our show is hosted by me, Jen Blackmer.
And me, Kara Duquette. Pop of Culture is a production of IPR on the campus of Ball State University. One more time.